And I'll start recording in 3, 2, 1.
Agriculture is an often invisible and yet still driving force in most of our lives. It allows us to eat and accounts for millions of jobs in the U.S. economy. But are there negative effects to this great provider? For Marylanders, the Chesapeake Bay is a similar force. It is a huge source of tourist dollars, and the money it generates from fishing is in the billions, with the products feeding many. However, the bay's vivid landscape of marine life is at risk of being stifled because of intense pollution affecting the area. What is causing this pollution, you might ask? Well, unfortunately, one of the biggest sources is that life-giving force we mentioned earlier, agriculture. So then comes the essential question: how do we balance this vital practice with the health of Maryland's defining feature? The Chesapeake Bay is pretty defined by the presence of agriculture around it. Agriculture takes up at least 1/4 of the land within the bay watershed, with over 87,000 working farms throughout the 64,000 square miles. So, how exactly does agriculture pollute? The main way pollutants make it into the Chesapeake Bay is through runoff, where rain washes those pollutants from agricultural fields into the water. Those pollutants from fields account for 40% of the total nitrogen and 50% of the total phosphorus in the bay, a huge amount of pollution.
Pesticide ran off a farm in a metro area into Lake Erie, and at the right time caused a toxic algae bloom. It shut down the water supply for 500,000, 500,000 people in Toledo, Ohio.
Small unit multicellular organisms called algae, as their numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger, they start to block out the light for organisms that live on the bottom. When their numbers swell and they ultimately die, decomposers will consume oxygen in the water, and which will deplete the water, and it can lead to something called an anoxic zone or a dead zone.
Dead zones, which have little to no oxygen, cause organisms within them to suffocate and die. Runoff also washes sediment from fields into the bay, which clogs the gills of fish and clouds the water, preventing aquatic plants from getting necessary light. So what is the human effect of all this pollution? The Chesapeake Bay provides a great source of seafood, recreation, and tourism, all of which generate significant revenue for the areas around it. Pollution corrupts these industries, as it is difficult to find fish that are good for eating or proper tourist destinations when the water is polluted. This water also flows through the massive bay watershed, meaning that the pollution of the bay affects plenty of places that aren't even close to it.
Scientists have discovered that some of these chemicals, they might affect the endocrine systems or the reproductive systems of living things. There's a lot of downstream consequences.
Some pesticide chemicals have properties that enable them to stay in the endocrine systems of fish, and they increase with toxicity over time. We're the apex predators, meaning that we consume fish, even those with chemically affected endocrine systems.
And so if something affects the base of a food chain, it's going to magnify up the food chain.
So, we know that the pollution of the Chesapeake Bay has a big effect on the people around it. But what exactly can we do about it? One answer is federal regulation. But are there federal regulations in place to meet the goal of farming? The Federal Farm Bill is a bill passed every 5 years that determines regulations on agricultural practices. Under the bill, there are 4 programs that are crucial to the Chesapeake Bay. The Conservation Enhancement Act, like its name, is meant to conserve and enhance the environment. The program provides funding to landowners to implement water protection technologies and water conservation practices. To further the goals of conservation and enhancement, the Farm Bill also funds for additional conservation-focused partnerships with the Regional Conservation Partnership Program and promotes farmers who currently use conservation practices through incentives under the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is not only a prevalent issue, but one where federal regulations have helped to alleviate the Chesapeake Bay. However, not everyone wants agricultural practices to be regulated in order to protect our watersheds. In fact, some conservative politicians are even attempting to roll back the regulations that are already in place. Why is that? One of the main reasons is cost concerns. Sustainable farming, although beneficial and even cheaper in the long run, does have immediate cost. Politicians are also concerned about taxes on farms, which can hinder the inheritance of farms in international trade. They worry that higher prices and higher taxes will put farms out of business. However, these conservative politicians neglect to acknowledge the huge boost in tourist dollars the economy of the Chesapeake Bay would receive as a result of the drop in pollution.
And sometimes there is a tendency, as you well know, to sort of forget the importance of rural America, the place where most of our food is produced, where a good deal of our water is impacted, where most of the feedstock for our power comes from.
Agriculture is a driving force within our lives that serves important duties, providing food and the ingredients to our everyday products. Nonetheless, we must consider our second greatest provider in this equation, the Earth's bodies of water, when making federal regulatory decisions. It's all about balancing the equation and considering all the factors that are accounted for within agriculture.
It really is going to take a village and a lot of different solutions to limit pollution.